Before a cigar gets its wrapper, it has to pass one test. Will it actually draw? And that's what this machine answers. This is the Drawmaster 40, and it tells us whether a cigar is physically built and ready to smoke the way that we anticipate. Now, the Drawmaster does not measure flavor. It does not decide whether the blend is good. It measures construction, and in a very unique way. Today I'm going to show you where the draw test fits into production, how the machine actually works, and what measurement tells us about a finished cigar utilizing a machine like this. Most people try to judge cigar construction solely by feeling the cigar. They squeeze the cigar and decide whether it feels too firm or too soft or too tight or too loose. An experienced hand can learn a lot that way. But feeling alone does not tell you how air is actually going to move through the cigar and through the bunch. Airflow is the real question. A cigar can feel perfectly acceptable and still draw really poorly. It can also feel firmer than expected and smoke absolutely beautifully. Instead of relying completely on touch, draw testing gives us measurement of resistance inside of the cigar before the wrapper ever goes on. At its simplest, draw testing measures how difficult it is to pull air through the bunch. If resistance is too low, the cigar may smoke too quickly. If resistance is too high, the cigar may become really difficult and just uncomfortable to smoke. The goal is not to make every cigar as loose as possible, although there's certainly some prerogatives out there around that. It is also not to pack the cigar as tightly as possible, and certainly some people are doing that. The goal is to create the correct operating range for that particular size and shape, blend, and finish smoking experience. So one thing that surprises people is when this test actually takes place. We do not wait until the cigar has been completely finished, although some people do that whenever they're questioning the finished production that they've put together, and then they'll recap the cigars. The bunch is draw tested during production. That's the way you want to do it. That's the goal. Before the wrapper is ever applied, before more labor and valuable material are committed to that cigar. So here's the basic sequence. The bunchero makes a bunch, places it into the mold. The cigar receives its first press. The cigars are then removed from the mold for draw testing before they are rotated in the mold and pressed a second time. In fact, the person that draw tests now oftentimes is actually rotating the cigars, although it is the job of the bunchero to make sure that that has been done on their molds. That second press helps even out the bunch and stabilize the shape of the cigar itself. The first press and rotation, we can identify a construction problem early during that time, while the bunch can still be removed, corrected, rebuilt, or discarded. It will also help with seam lines that are naturally going to occur in just about any mold selection that you make today on the market. The goal is that protects the wrapper, it reduces wasted labor, prevents a bad bunch from moving deeper into the production line. The wrapper is the finishing stage of the cigar. It's not supposed to hide or rescue a construction problem. It's never the goal of a wrapper, although it's a vital part of construction. If that construction problem has already presented itself while the cigar is still a bunch, then it must be corrected at this stage. Now, once a cigar has passed the draw test, it receives a physical mark with a regular marker. That's on the inside of the bunch. That mark tells the roller that that cigar is ready to move on and receive a wrapper. In fact, the roller is not supposed to roll anything that has not received a mark. And if it arrives at their table without a mark, then they're meant to inform their production supervisor or the chief of production immediately if they receive a mold that hasn't actually been marked. Now, if a cigar has failed, it gets removed from normal production flow. Some failures can be corrected. You can try rebuilding the bunch. Other failures just don't make sense to repair, particularly with certain sizes and shapes. The decision of this type of construction problem, the bunchero and the supervisor might find a solution for a particular cigar that can be rebuilt, but many times they're actually not going to get rebuilt at this stage. Now, every cigar we make goes through this checkpoint. It's not random sampling. And it's not one cigar selected from a large group. It's every single bunch and every single cigar in that mold is going to receive a mark and earn its way into the next step of the manufacturing process, where the roller is going to take it from there. While we're checking the draw, we're also checking the ring gauge. The Drawmaster uses a ring gauge tool all its own, but there's also an important adjustment that operators have to understand when they're selecting the correct ring gauge on a tool like this. This tool is made out of a thermal plastic, so it's actually going to expand whenever they're making this tool. And so the ring gauges here are actually variable. The standard draw ring tool is effectively one gauge too large for this stage of the production. It always measures out too large when you put a caliper to it. Because of that, the operator always selects the tool marked one gauge below the cigar being tested. Now that's not just the mold being a little tight. What it is this is effectively one ring gauge off. The larger ring gauges are oftentimes about 2 ring gauges off if someone's using this as their standard tool. Ring gauge itself deserves a separate video all its own because there's so much to talk about here. It's a little bit more complex than simply checking the diameter, particularly when you're in manufacturing and the cigars are still under quite a bit of humidity. The wrapper is not merely a decorative thing that comes with the cigar. It's part of the construction. It adds tension around the bunch once the cigar has passed this examination. In our experience, applying the wrapper can increase the draw resistance by about 5 inches of water on the gauge after it's been rolled and passed a check. Wrappers such as Connecticut can make that especially noticeable. Connecticut is thin and elastic, and it also shrinks quite a bit more over time. The filler, binder, wrapper, humidity, and aging process all interact so that the pre-wrapper testing here on the Drawmaster 40 is one controlled step inside of the complete system of understanding how the production of your cigars are going to turn out. Now that you understand where the test happens, let me show you how the machine actually runs. We're gonna run a cigar through it and you can see the whole process. We're gonna watch how quickly an operator in a production line could verify not only the ring gauge and the draw and decide whether or not that bunch is going to move forward through the process or whether it's going to be stopped and either reconstructed or discarded. Okay, so we've just turned on the pump. And what we're going to do first is we have a calibration tool. We're going to insert the calibration tool, and then here we need to adjust the mandrel. This is called the mandrel. It actually mimics your smoking of the cigar. So we want to get it as close as possible to the head of the cigar while maintaining about 1 inch to a 1/2 inch sticking out of the cigar. We're going to lock the mandrel in place, and then we're going to go ahead and check the calibration tool. There's a piece of latex in here that's expanding, and what we want to do is see a perfect 40 on this screen. We have a flow gauge on the side. We're going to adjust the flow gauge until we hit a perfect 40. We expect 40 inches of water with this calibration tool. If the draw tester hasn't been calibrated, you can't consistently get draw checks out of this machine. You have to know the resistance of measurement based on how the pump is running and based on the amount of particulates that are built up in the filter. So this is going to change throughout the day. So sometimes they'll actually do this calibration check right between molds in the middle of a process. They always will do it as soon as they start up the machine. So we're going to take the calibration gauge out. We're going to do a quick ring gauge check on our cigar for 53. Comes through perfectly for 53. We're going to insert the cigar, press the foot pedal down, and check our flow. So right now we're at about 32 on the inches of water, and then we could go all the way up to 40. Now if the bunch has more resistance, it'll be closer to 40. The SOP for this cigar as a Parejo cigar, a round cigar, is going to be 30 to 40 inches of water. So this cigar passes just fine. It's a little bit awkward because I'm doing this backwards. So you can see really easily within a few seconds, we can get an accurate measurement of whether or not that cigar is inside of the operating range or whether we need to reject it. If there's too much resistance or too open or outside of the standard operating procedure for this particular cigar or even this customer, because we will change this based on what the customer is actually wanting from us here in the factory. And once again, once the measurement has been confirmed, the operator is then going to mark that individual cigar. And you can see here in the mold how many of these cigar marks actually end up on the mold. That's a good sign that that factory is doing draw testing if they have marker marks on the inside of the mold. So at this point, these cigars can all return to be pressed. They will have been rotated and they'll go back into the press for a final press before they receive their wrapper. So the Drawmaster contains filters because small tobacco particulates built up over time actually pull the vacuum system down. And that's a big element of having to calibrate and clean out this machine. And in fact, even the latex on this machine has to be changed out about weekly. Pro tip on the latex that you buy, you have to keep these in the refrigerator. So you have to have a nice refrigerator in your factory to keep the latex in, because if it doesn't get kept in the crisper, then it will just fall apart very rapidly. Really important note on the latex, it never actually touches any of the surface of the cigar that you're going to be putting your mouth to. I know some people are latex sensitive out there. This is just going on the filler itself. The wrapper is then going to go over top of that, and there's nothing that's going to be left behind. This is a food grade latex that they're utilizing here. These tubes are very clean. They come in these nice sterile bags whenever we receive them. So this machine gives us the result, but the next demonstration, we're going to make airflow easier to visualize. Now these tubes are just 3D printed, and we have varying different sizes of holes, and it's just a straight hole all the way through, so a very smooth amount of airflow. And I have them marked for what size each one of the tubes are. And here's 40 thousandths of an inch through the tube. And we can see that we've maxed out our gauge. So in this case, this cigar will not draw, even though we know that it has a 40 thousandths of an inch. Here we have 50 thousandths of an inch. Here we have 60 thousandths of an inch. I'm gonna put that in. Really important, I can hear airflow coming through this tube, so I know the tubes are actually drawing. Here we have 70 thousandths of an inch. Still not working there. And here we have 80 thousandths of an inch. And 80 thousandths of an inch is right at about 45 inches of water. And you notice how fast you go from being completely off the scale to being something that is really close in range. And now we have 90 thousandths of an inch. And 90 thousandths of an inch is right at about 32 inches of water. So it's about the same as that bunch that we were working with earlier. So you see between the two of these, you have 10 thousandths of an inch difference in the interior hole going through these tubes that I've made. And you get almost 10 inches of water difference, a little over 10 inches of water difference between just the two of these tubes. Now we're gonna look at 100 thousandths of an inch. And 100 thousandths of an inch is too loose. So you should think of the cigar as a cylinder filled with leaves that has different thicknesses and shapes and moisture levels, even though we only utilize this tool for Parejo shapes, but that's how important it is. The air has to find a path through that organic structure every time the smoker takes a draw. If the internal structure becomes too dense, the air has difficulty moving through it. If the structure becomes too open, like we saw with the 100 thousandths of an inch, the air moves too freely. The Drawmaster measures resistance created by that packed structure under repeatable conditions, which is super valuable information for our Buncheros. The latex sleeve on the machine closes around the cigar and creates a seal, not literally duplicating the wrapper, but it creates a controlled boundary that you need to compare one cigar to another the same way that it's going to be after it's wrapped. It gives us the same test conditions, which is why that latex outer layer going as far down the cigar is so important, and why these machines have become so infamous, frankly. Let me turn this pump off real quick. The pumps are kind of loud. The result is measured in inches of water, and that sounds complicated, but it's simply a pressure drop measurement. The higher the number means more resistance, the lower the number, less resistance. Neither one is automatically good or bad without knowing the intended specification for that particular cigar, that size, and frankly the customer preference. Now for our round cigars or Parejo, the typical working range is 30 to 40 inches of water at this stage of production where it hasn't had a wrapper yet. For box press or trunk press cigars, we reduce that target range approximately 5 inches of water. Those cigars are generally tested in a range of 25 to 35 inches of water because additional pressing actually changes the geometry and can tighten the final structure of the cigar. But box pressing is kind of its own video, the same way that, ring gauges are their own video. This is why there cannot be one universal draw number for every cigar. A round cigar, a Parejo cigar, and a box press cigar behave very differently. A 50 ring gauge cigar and a 60 ring gauge cigar contain different internal volumes and frankly a lot more structure and surface area in that 60 ring gauge cigar, and will not necessarily respond to this test the exact same way. Blend construction actually plays a role here as well. Different tobaccos have different thicknesses, physical characteristics. The way those leaves are folded, positioned, compressed, combined can change the resistance even when the finished bunches have very similar weights overall. And that goes into a whole plethora of different bunching considerations that you have to make whenever you're putting together a cigar. Some projects call for slightly firmer draws while others are designed to feel more open. There's something called cuadro, semi-cuadro of box press that are very open sometimes. The specification has to match the cigar instead of forcing every product into one generic number. This also helps to explain why burn problems are often blamed on the wrong thing, frankly. People frequently assume a cigar that has tunneled or canoed is because of one section containing Ligero, another with Seco, or a particular priming of the tobacco that's out of place somehow. Look, when it goes into the Lieberman and the bunch is set, the tobaccos generally end up mixed in the volume entirely, and that's part of why we actually call it a blend. The tobacco obviously influences combustion, but properly aged leaf can behave very differently from fresher tobaccos, younger tobaccos. A well-aged Ligero can sometimes burn faster than some younger Secos. A 5-year-old Ligero will outburn a 2-year-old or 1-year-old Seco most days of the week. Construction often becomes a stronger explanation for a serious burn malfunction. Even density and improper bunching or an open channel inside of the cigar can cause airflow to favor one area or one side of the bunch. Once air repeatedly moves through that path in an easier and easier way, the burn can accelerate in that one zone and another area of the cigar just falls behind. This is why the tube is such a useful understanding of how this actually works. Airflow does not move equally across every part of a packed cylinder. It searches for the easiest path possible through the cylinder. Good construction creates controlled airflow instead of allowing one uncontrolled channel to burn or dominate. It's not impossible for that to happen with a machine like this, but it's a lot less likely. Another surprising factor is how little weight it takes to change the draw. We have found differences of 500 milligrams roughly can change the draw around 10 inches of water on certain sizes. Now, 500 milligrams is about the weight of a Tylenol, for example. And that is a very massive difference from a very small amount of tobacco. It shows how sensitive construction can be and why simply weighing the bunch of a will or a half will of cigars does not provide enough information today to be making the best quality cigars that you possibly can, particularly in Parejo, where you can adequately utilize this machine. Now, weight is still useful and we still weigh the cigars to maintain consistency. This gives our factory another production control. But two cigars can have nearly identical weights while the internal distribution of a bunch of cigars can have very different airflow across multiple paths in the bunch. Draw testing checks the performance directly. Instead of assuming the cigars should smoke correctly because the weight looks right on a wheel of 50 or the bunch feels acceptable, the factory verifies the resistance across each and every cigar. That way, we know the distribution of tobacco is completely equal. Now, the Drawmaster does not remotely replace a Bunchero, the roller, or the experience of a production team. It gives those craftsmen the ability to have a reliable measurement that supports their judgment and helps them identify changes before those changes become a finished cigar. We've also noticed that it helps greatly with training. When a newer Bunchero can compare their work against one of these machines, or even a Bunchero that's worked for a really long time but never actually had their work tested, it becomes part of learning the density and kind of relearning the density even of the leaf placement, of the pressure that's being put on the molds. And they get a really accurate measurement of what the final result is of their product. For us, the real value in draw testing is it catches performance problems earlier. It protects wrapper yields here in the factory. It supports consistent production and gives every cigar a measurable checkpoint before it moves on to the final rolling stage here in the saloon. Before a cigar gets its wrapper, it has to prove that it's physically built to perform. That is the question the Drawmaster answers, and it answers that question for every single cigar we produce today. And for us, that's what quality control is all about. So if you'd like to see more videos about cigar making or cigar manufacturing processes, drop a comment below and let us know what you'd like to hear about next. Genuinely interested to hear your feedback. Thank you so much for the people that have commented in the past, letting me know about audio issues and so on. I'm trying to learn this new part of what a lot of us business owners have to learn in social media, which is recording and doing YouTubes and things of that nature, which I'm not the best at yet. But thank you for sticking in there and listening to what we have to say. Thanks so much.